Welcome to this episode of The Common Sense Skeptic, a very quick breakdown of the IFT-2 flight from November 18th of 2023, which will likely fall under more scrutiny as pieces of information come to light. IFT-2 launched from Boca Chica in the early hours of Saturday morning at 7:03 a.m. local time, and despite an uneventful launch, over the course of the next 8 minutes, this system would suffer two fatal events, one in the booster and another in the second stage. The amount of material to comb through for clues is minimal. SpaceX did not livestream on YouTube, only on Twitter, which prevented a download of their video directly from them, and conditions were not ideal for seeing much detail the further into flight the craft went. There were no onboard cameras monitoring chambers on the craft, no live cameras shooting down the side of it either to look for clues or ruptures. So, this episode can really only use a limited amount of footage to focus on three things: the liftoff and then the destruction of both halves of the craft. 7:03 a.m. Central Standard Time, the countdown comes out of a last second hold, and the 33 Super Heavy engines fire up. To everyone's surprise, including ours, all engines managed to light with no failures out of the gate. And while some reports are that damage to the pad is also minimal, it will be interesting to see what remediation it needs before it can be used again. So that was also surprising, given the 1,000-foot plume that was sent up on liftoff, and the debris that some cameras caught getting thrown outside the perimeter fence. As the booster shoved Starship skyward, a trail of darker smoke was left behind, and that should not have been there. Methane burns clean, so whatever this was not fuel, but it also seemed to have no effect on the Raptors according to the infographic banner. Other than smoke, the only other item of note on the video was the number of heat shield tiles that got ripped off of the Starship already. Around the 30-second mark, you can see them flying away one by one. From this high-def still shot, it looks like Starship was already missing in the neighborhood of 85 heat shield tiles. Again, this didn't affect anything on the way up, and Super Heavy and Starship continued on their way downrange over the Gulf of Mexico until they didn't. One of the points we made during IFT-1 was about the call-out for Max Q, and how we thought that announcement was inaccurate, likely a timed event rather than based on actual monitored conditions. Here's the IFT-1 callout at 1:19 into flight.
As the velocity increases, the density of the atmosphere is decreasing.
Max Q.
Speed of roughly 840 kilometers per hour, altitude at 8 kilometers. Here's the IFT-2 callout at 1:07 into flight.
Max Q.
Speed roughly 1,300 kilometers per hour, elevation of 11 kilometers. The only stat between these two in the same neighborhood is the time into launch, and IFT-1 took longer to get away from the pad. That appears to verify our claim from our breakdown of IFT-1. The visuals of the ship as it conducted booster engine cutoff and hot fire separation could easily be confused with being CGI, especially against the darker background. The main engine shutting down, followed by the plume of flame from Starship as it was still attached to Super Heavy, produced quite the photo op. And of course, that image is now all over social media. But that was the last thing on this launch that went right. And here's where we will break it down second by second. According to the infographic, at T+244, Starship, still attached to Super Heavy, fires up its Raptors in a staggered pattern, the center cluster last, sending the plume out sideways in all directions. At T+250, Super Heavy peels away from Starship and begins to flip backwards at over 5,500 kilometers per hour. Backing up a little bit because this part is important. We need to check out the pattern on Super Heavy's Raptor array because there is a bunch of things that happen very quickly. The gimbal cluster, which doesn't shut down during this maneuver, is joined first by a staggered pattern of Raptors firing up in the inner ring, lighting all but one, which we are going to assume is a failure to light, followed shortly afterwards by one of the gimbaling units going cold. At this point, the propellant tanks of Super Heavy are showing only 10 to 15%. As the vehicle continues to flip, more inner ring Raptors fail, counterclockwise from the first failure to light, and by the time the booster is facing away from Starship, 3 Raptors in the inner ring and 1 in the gimbal cluster are not lit. Visible plumes come from the aft. At 3:12, another Raptor quits. Another at 3:14, when the first burst of gases comes from the side of the craft, and a second later, the 6th Raptor in a row quits, leaving 4 of 10 Raptors in the inner ring firing. More venting, and 2 seconds later, a second Raptor in the gimbal cluster is gone. Then the entire inner ring dies, leaving only 1 Raptor in the gimbal cluster firing for 1 second before it dies too. From all appearances, this is a cascading failure of the Raptor assembly, while the ship is still moving the wrong way at 3,800 kilometers per hour at 90 kilometers altitude. 3 events now happen in very quick succession, within the space of 1 second at the 3-minute 20-second mark. A very energetic explosion in the engine compartment happens at 3:20. About 10 video frames later, the ship splits in half at the common dome, releasing a cloud of unignited gases. 1 frame later, they ignite. The next frame, the ignition expands, then expands again, and that is the end of Super Heavy. This is how it played out in real time with the 3 SpaceX commentators.
Views of our Super Heavy booster, and as you can see, the Super Heavy booster has just experienced a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. However, our ship is still underway with all 6.
Power and telemetry nominal.
The call from the commentators was RUD, Rapid Unscheduled Disassembly. No mention of an FTS being triggered. And we figure the structural collapse of the ship at the common dome caused the anomaly for a couple reasons. First, the burst of gas from the side was not ignited when it first escaped the ship. Second, triggering an FTS out over open water in the marine exclusion zone makes no sense. With no engines firing, it would simply fall to the sea in relatively one piece, rather than raining down steel shrapnel across a much wider area. And third, the commentators never mentioned FTS. The only people who did are those on Twitter who feel the need to put a happy face on this. So our conclusion for Super Heavy based on the video would be that a cascading failure in the Raptor assembly, failures significant enough to cause venting and an explosion in the engine compartment, contributed to a twisting of the ship that split the length of Super Heavy at the common dome, leading to the loss of vehicle at 90 kilometers altitude at T plus 321, leaving us with Starship as it makes its way onward. When the camera reacquires her at T plus 328, it's moving 6,500 kilometers per hour, 9 kilometers higher than the Super Heavy explosion, out of harm's way, and moving nicely as a tiny dot on a screen, until 7:07, when a trail appears behind the ship now at 149 kilometers elevation, moving 18,000 kilometers per hour. This will be the apogee of the flight, although the vehicle continues to gain velocity. Over the Kármán line, set at 100 kilometers, but 11 kilometers short of LEO. At T plus 740, another large plume comes from the ship, now moving 21,000 kilometers per hour. Whatever these plumes were, according to the telemetry bar, they didn't affect the Raptors. All 6 icons remain lit up until they all disappear at 8:03 into flight. And if we back up a little bit, we can see a progression here. After the first 2 plumes, we lose sight of Starship Raptors at T plus 752 in the orange haze, despite the telemetry bar showing all 6 Raptors firing. The camera manages to keep it in frame somehow, and at 8:03, all Raptor icons go dark, while the ship keeps gaining speed, and 1 second later, with almost no propellant left in the tanks, there appears to be a series of large explosions, causing all telemetry functions to freeze. This goes unmentioned by ground control and the commentators, who go silent for about 30 seconds. Then this graphic comes up on the screen, awaiting acquisition of signal, but of course, there is no signal to acquire now. Then for several minutes keep talking about the launch as if it's headed towards orbital insertion on a nominal trajectory. Here are some of the comments.
So we are going to head into the coast phase, planned for the next about hour and 5 minutes. We'll be returning around the T plus 1 hour and 15 minute mark. And that's while we're waiting for Starship to continue on to its next step for re-entry. We're not totally sure what video we're going to get, and that video comes normally by overflying ground stations, but we don't have a ton along our flight path. So fingers crossed that we will get some via Starlink on this mission since we're testing that out.
From the video available, our suspicion is that the Raptor infographic was frozen on 6 lit Raptors, and one by one, the plumes we see were individual Raptors calling it quits, perhaps from lack of fuel. All the engines go dark at 7:52. The next visible event happens at 8:05, and at 8:08, one final explosion, likely causing major damage to the ship. Now, one thing we noticed, going over this footage time and again, is that as the final largest cloud subsides, for about 1 second, you can see a corkscrewing vapor trail at the center. That is very likely all that's left of the ship, and the last visual happens at T plus 818. After 15 seconds of dead air, Siva comes on to announce the next item in his script.
They're standing by for a call out here. Coming up on the projected time that ship would shut down its engines.
Despite the claim that now was when the Raptors were going to shut down, there's no chance the propellant reserves on Starship would have ever lasted that long. Then there's a shot of the control room with nobody looking particularly worried, and the SpaceX employees at Hawthorne are still cheering on the launch. These are all indicators that the FTS was not triggered manually and that an automated FTS signal was never received by ground control. At about T plus 9:30, the alternate script comes out and the backpedaling starts.
Major successful milestones through hot staging, which was the big objective today.
The main objective today was to get through hot staging, we're told. Major successes today, they declare, as shrapnel from Starship and Super Heavy continue to fall from the sky into the Gulf of Mexico. Similar to the icing on the cake comment made by Kate during the Starship IFT-1 loss of vehicle, just prior to the thing ripping itself apart after the FTS failed to do the job.
I do want to remind everyone that everything after clearing the tower was icing on the cake.
Then, at 9:45, Siva announces the ship is now in a coasting phase for the next hour and 5 minutes, either oblivious to the loss or pretending it's still in the air.
We are going to head into the coast phase, planned for the next about hour and 5 minutes. We'll be returning around the T plus 1 hour and 15 minute mark.
But the people in the background at ground control only now seem to be asking each other questions as the signal, of course, is not coming back. 2.5 minutes have elapsed, and they're just realizing now there's something wrong. Musk, in the control room with his brother Kimball, is laughing and smiling until T plus 10:45 when he focuses his attention on a monitoring station. The tech in the white t-shirt and ball cap starts pointing out information on the monitor. 3 minutes have now elapsed since Starship erupted, and Musk's demeanor now changes. When the commentators come back at T plus 11:20, they finally announce the loss of data stream and suspicion of loss of vehicle. Thus begins the spin cycle in earnest.
We have lost the data from the second stage. We haven't gotten any more data since then, so we think we may have lost the second stage. However, what we do know right now is we had an on-time launch at 7 o'clock. We got through the boats. First stage looked beautiful with 33 Raptor engines firing. We got the hot staging, the thing that we really wanted to see and impressed. We saw the separation, we saw the flip maneuver, we saw the light up of the 6 Raptor engines on Starship, and headed away. Everything really looked good.
Now, as often happens, while we were writing this segment, additional footage comes to light, and in this case, this clip comes from a YouTube channel called Astronomy Live. Their crew were filming the ascent of IFT-2 from the Florida Keys, and had a very different angle without the orange hue and a clear blue sky. This is what they caught from Florida.
This is just the raw video here, so you can see. So there's the explosion of Starship, the big explosion of the FTS system. So, I got in the view, and immediately I noticed it's tumbling and spewing fuel, and, oh, by the way, the engines aren't running anymore. But there's this one big piece, and from what I've seen, it looks like it still has the front flaps. So we were joking about this, that it's the front fell off, and it really is. It's like the front of Starship came off with the FTS.
This ship that was involved in the incident...
The one the front fell off?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not very typical. I'd like to make that point.
Well, how is it untypical?
Very seldom does anything like this happen. I just don't want people thinking that they aren't safe.
Was this safe?
Well, I was thinking more about the other ones.
The ones that are safe?
Yeah, the ones the front doesn't fall off.
Well, if this wasn't safe...
Well, I'm not saying it wasn't safe. It's just perhaps not quite as safe as some of the other ones.
Why?
Well, some of them are built so the front doesn't fall off at all.
Well, wasn't this built so the front wouldn't fall off?
Well, obviously not.
How do you know?
Well, because the front fell off.
So whatever happened to the rest of the Starship, whether it tore itself apart, or if the FTS did it without notifying ground control, the upper chamber of Starship continued on towards Florida, tumbling in the air with no tanks and no engines. So we expect somebody saw it land, or has a rough idea where it wound up. That segment would do major damage should it impact any of the vessels at sea off the west coast of Florida. So some incredible footage from these guys in Florida that answered questions that SpaceX weren't even starting to ask at the time. Now, a lot of people online are calling this flight a major success because the ship made it further than last time and because that hot fire test ring appeared to work. although the damage done to the booster by the Starship engines will be much harder to judge now, since Super Heavy has been reduced to a jigsaw puzzle spread across hundreds of square kilometers of the Gulf of Mexico. We are not among those that consider this to be a successful launch or a successful test. Why not? For starters, compared to IFT-1, there were twice as many vehicle failures. Yes, both vehicles in IFT-1 were lost, but they were lost as a joined unit when it failed to separate. In IFT-2, you have two, presumably unrelated failures, minutes apart, where each independent piece suffered its own destructive end. Further, the scapegoats that Musk used to dismiss the failure of IFT-1 aren't in play here. He mainly blamed a mismatch of Raptor engines and the hydraulic system failures for the loss of vehicle. Those two factors don't play here. Not even the pad fondag can be blamed for the IFT-2 failures, meaning IFT-2 failed for completely different reasons, twice. Also, this anomaly, already under investigation involving the FAA, does nothing towards getting Starship closer to readiness for the contracts that Musk has taken out on it. This empty test article, nowhere near a functional mission prototype sent to the lowest edge of space at 150 kilometers, failed to reach orbital velocity for insertion without disintegrating. And what's worse, ground control took several minutes to catch on to that event. Although NASA dignitaries, Senator Bill Nelson and Administrator Jim Free, put on their diplomatic faces in light of another failed launch, this outing could not have instilled any faith in Musk being able to make good on his Artemis 3 2025 deadline. Looking at this reasonably, since Musk can only launch 5 orbital flights per year from the Boca Chica facility, he's got 5 flights in 2024 and up to 5 flights in 2025 to prove that Starship can launch safely and return safely with both components. After all, NASA is paying them for a reusable system. After proving they can do this, then they have to prove their refilling technology on orbit. Once that's done, they have to get the machine human-rated without having an abort system if this is going to be the machine landing people on the moon. Then they have to conduct an unmanned demo flight similar to Artemis 1 out to the moon and back. That mission expected to take 20 tanker launches to refill the outbound HLS prototype, which alone makes the 2025 Artemis 3 deadline impossible to hit. Also, somewhere in that schedule, he'll have to squeeze in a Dear Moon mission or lose that contract. You may think this is us making this out to be worse than it is, but Jim Free, the NASA administrator in charge of this program, made these public comments back in June 2023, and seems some people haven't heard them yet, so it's time for a refresher.
SpaceX is on contract to do an uncrewed lander. Our milestone before that is the ship-to-ship cryogenic propellant transfer. We're delaying our CDR until they complete that. Then they have to just get flying. So when you step back and you look at, that's a lot of launches to get those missions done. We have a firm fixed price contract with SpaceX. Their job is to deliver that to us. And I'm going to hold them accountable to it. So I get a lot of questions. Will you make the date? Well, they need to get flying before we can get any kind of assessment.
I flied?
No, you followed.
I fall.
If you figure they need a number of launches to do their depot for our crewed flight, they need a number of launches to do the demo, they need a number of launches just to get flying, they have a significant number of launches to go. That, of course, gives me concern about the December of 2025 date.
Now, with those comments in mind, let's read his Twitter post again and keyword his diplomatic announcement. It's the second sentence in the post that is the most telling. Looking forward to seeing what can be learned from this test that moves us closer to the next milestone. We interpret that as saying he doesn't inherently see what was to be gained from this test because he's looking forward to seeing what can be learned and he's wondering how it got Starship closer to their next milestone, which is, as we saw in the June clip, proving that they can conduct the on-orbit propellant transfer. That's what needs to happen before Musk gets any more money from NASA towards Starship. And the NASA CDR, the Critical Design Review for Artemis 3, is on hold until that mission is completed successfully. This is obviously where the focus of SpaceX needs to be. So things like the Army contract that Musk was awarded to develop point-to-point logistics delivery by rocket should be revoked, since they will not be able to deliver on it. And all those dreams that Musk and Gwynne Shotwell had of replacing airliners with oceanic-launched starships within a decade of her pronouncement have all but gone up in smoke. Thanks for watching this episode of The Common Sense Skeptic. Normally there's a lot more footage to comb through for an event like this, but SpaceX production quality for this one was lacking to say the least. Better luck next time. If you have any comments or theories to share about the flight, feel free to add them in the comments section when you give the video a thumbs up, then share the episode with your friends, and double check the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you'll know when The Common Sense Skeptic returns.